Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the Mom on the Verge podcast, where I aim to help you improve your sense of joy, purpose, and meaning in this life. We will talk about a lot of different ways we can do this, but ultimately, we'll be working toward finding our way back home to ourselves and remembering that even in the most challenging times, peace is only a breath away. I am your host, Katie Farinas, a mom, nurse, and yogi on a mission to improve mental health and build community in our world. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the show. Today's episode is really near and dear to my heart. We are going to be talking about something called somatic healing. And if you're not familiar with somatic healing, it is basically the idea that trauma that we experience in our lives becomes stored in our bodies, and that stored trauma impacts how we communicate, how we connect with others, how we think, how we view the world. And so we can actually improve our lives by not only just working with our mind and our thoughts, but getting rid of that stored trauma in our body. There's actually a nerve that runs through our body called the vagus nerve. It's a huge nerve that runs basically from the base of our neck through our core. And it is responsible for the communication between mind and body. And that communication is like a two-way highway, one direction going from body to brain and the other direction going from brain to body. And I think most of us would probably assume that the majority of that communication is from the brain down to our body. But that's actually only 20% of the communication. 80% of that highway, the information on that highway, is coming from our bodies to our brains. And so it's really important that we can calm our bodies, calm our nervous systems by releasing the trauma that's stored there. And I actually was at a workshop this past weekend at my yoga studio, and it was a past life regression workshop. That was really interesting. Side topic, but the facilitator of the workshop defined trauma in a way that I really liked. So I'm going to share it with you. And she said that trauma is any event in our life that makes us feel separate from love. And so you can imagine, and Becky and I do talk about this during the show, that all of us have experienced trauma, whether you realize it or not. You have experienced trauma. Most people, or many people, identify trauma as something really big and horrible. But if you define it as anything that has made you feel separate from love in your life, then you know that you have experienced trauma in your life, and it is stored in your body, and it does accumulate over time if we don't work it out. So Becky also gives us some really great ideas on how we can do that, on our own. And what I've realized over the years is that I instinctually did this. I didn't know what I was doing when I was doing a lot of yoga and a lot of breath work and going to nature a lot. I didn't know that I was doing this thing called somatic healing. I just knew that my body needed it and that my body felt better afterwards. And so I felt calmer and more grounded and more like myself. And so I think we all do this instinctually, but if we can really learn to harness it, we can really make a huge impact on our daily lives. So I am so excited for this episode, for you to hear this episode. As always, I want you to let me know what you think. I love feedback. I will put all of Becky's information in the show notes. Also at the bottom of the show notes is a link called Linktree. If you click on that, you will have access to all things me, including signing up for the newsletter, as well as signing up for my newest freebie, which I released this past week. It's a guide for busy moms on how to incorporate spiritual practices into your day, so you can learn to start coming back home to yourself and finding your connection to your authenticity. So they're very quick and easy things that you can do, can definitely fit into a busy mom's schedule. And I give you a lot of different options to see what feels right for you. So if you'd like to sign up for that guide, you can go to the Linktree link. If you want to sign up for the newsletter there as well. If you want to contact me through Facebook, Instagram, or email, use that link as well. It's one link and get you everything related to me. All right, guys, I hope you really enjoy this. I can't wait to hear your feedback. And I will, at the end of the show, be giving you some grounding practices to try yourself. All right. Love you guys. Have a great week. Bye. All right. Hi, Becky. Welcome to Mom on the Verge. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Katie. I'm so excited to chat with you.
I am too. I am really excited about this conversation. You specialize in a lot of topics that I am super interested in learning more about, and things that I have gotten questions about from some of my listeners. So this is actually really a perfect timing for this conversation. Could we start out by you just giving us a little bit of your background about who you are, what you do, your life, and what led you to this point, and in what you do?
Yeah, I'm a trauma-informed marriage coach, 35 hours away from being able to officially call myself a somatic practitioner. And I've got two littles, Ollie and Anna, and they're 7 and 4. So it's definitely back to school season over here. And I've been married for, it'll be 12 years in January. And I did not become a marriage coach because I've killed the game of marriage. We really struggled. We got married young. I was 21, he was 23. And pretty early on, we saw this toxic dance forming of, some might call it codependency and addiction, or anxious attachment style and avoidant attachment style. It was basically chase and run, where I was doing the chasing, the fear of abandonment, and he was like, give me space, woman, like isolating, And so we became really repelling forces. When we were bad. When we were good, we were good. But it was like this toxic pattern we couldn't break. Until 10 years later, we tried everything to break the pattern, to heal. We tried, traditional therapy, couples counseling, EMDR, subconscious reprogramming, podcasts, books, yoga, everything. And it was like, our relationship is still getting worse. And so it reached its head 10 years into marriage. We ended up separating, and we're talking about divorce. And that's when I stumbled upon somatic work. I took a course, did a program that taught me how to regulate my nervous system, move trauma out of the body. And we'll dive into details, but the short of it is we took our marriage from like the brink of death and went on to survive, heal, thrive. And now I'm like, I still pinch myself to say we're doing amazing. Like, our family's been repaired, and now I get to share this with other women.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So at the time, did you recognize that you were suffering from trauma, that was an influence on yourself or your marriage?
I remember going into marriage, and one of Sebastian's my husband, one of his groomsmen was a therapist, and he was like warning Sebastian, like, hey, Becky suddenly losing her dad before you guys met is gonna play a role in your marriage. Because my dad died of a heart attack my freshman year of college. It was like a month before I met Sebastian. And so I remember thinking, like, no, he doesn't know me. I'm good. I'm strong. I bounced back from that. And I forget at what point I like finally came to terms with, like, oh, wow, it might have been even like 4 or 5 years in, where I'm like, I think the loss of my dad, like, I can't deny, plays a huge factor. And I'm terrified to lose this man now. Like, I've already lost the most important man in my life once. I can't go through this again. So it did lead to a lot of clinging, codependency, monitoring, like controlling behaviors out of fear of that loss repeating itself.
Okay. And so I guess let's go back a second and just define trauma. So, because I think that word can take on many different definitions, because some people think trauma is something that has to be really big, like I was beaten as a child, or I had experienced sexual assault, or I was abandoned by my parents, or something like that, which of course are very big traumas. But how do you define trauma, and what kinds of trauma that maybe are not as easily recognizable by someone can actually be informing their behavior?
Yeah, great question, and really common thought that I had for a while that many people are like, I haven't been through trauma. That sounds dramatic or like too big or whatever. But my favorite definition of trauma is just it's anything that has overwhelmed your nervous system's ability to cope. So you might have heard those listening like big T trauma or little T trauma, and it can just help kind of categorize. The big T tends to be those like big impact, fast, hard, like life threatening experiences, like a plane crash or going to war or being assaulted or, like near death type things, things that threaten your physical safety or life. And then little T tend to be more threatening to your sense of love and belonging or more threatening to your ego. And so those might be things like betrayal trauma or loss of friendship or psychological abuse, spiritual abuse. They tend to be like, it's not like you're physically in danger, but it is psychologically damaging. And I also like to say big T compared to little t. Big T is kind of like too fast, too hard, too soon. Little t is more like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It can be kind of the environment you're living in, the air you're breathing, if it's toxic, neglect, even like well meaning parents, but just not knowing how to help a kid feel seen, understood, heard, experience human connection. That's kind of, yeah, the difference. I like to paint the picture on a basic level.
Okay. So I think that's really great. I think that makes it so much clearer for our listeners. But given that second definition that you gave, I feel like there is no human walking on this planet who has not experienced little t trauma. That,
Yeah,
that
I
is,
agree.
yeah, that is all of us who have experienced it. So then that begs the question, how do we identify it, and how do we identify how it might be impacting us, or if it is impacting us?
One, like to add on to that real quick though, it's like more about how it overwhelms your unique nervous system's ability to cope than the thing itself. Because let's say, I mean, even betrayal trauma, we'll use that one. Some women that like ruins them and it, wrecks their nervous system. That is something that it just puts you under so much distress, most women, but there's some women that like that's not, they're like, whatever, bye, okay, like,
Mhm.
yeah, that hurt, but like I know how to move on from this. I'm either gonna like move on from this marriage or I choose to repair it. But whether it becomes a trauma or not is like really depends on your unique nervous system, your own triggers, your own past wounds. So can you repeat the question? Because I just
Yes.
wanted to.
Okay. Yes. So, well, I'll repeat the question, but also your statement made me think of another question. So, my question was, how can we as individuals walking around identify if we think we have experienced trauma,
Mhm.
and which of those traumas may be informing our, I had said behavior, but like thoughts, patterns in our
Mhm.
lives, behaviors, relationships, the lens through which we're seeing the world? Like, how do we know if we've experienced it and how it's impacting us? So that's like one question. And then what you made me think of as the second question is maybe rewinding a little bit for our listeners and trying to explain what overwhelming the nervous system looks and feels like. So for people out there who maybe haven't done a lot of this self inquiry, would they even recognize what that looks like for them?
Okay. Yeah. And I feel like I can answer both those questions like in the same way. So those are good ones.
Okay. Okay.
So, how do we know we're caught in trauma? And then what does overwhelming the nervous system look and feel like? So, it's, I would point women just to, or listeners to the symptoms that they're experiencing, like the physical symptoms. So, just even scanning your body right now as you're listening to this podcast, is my chest tight? Do I have a headache? Like, is there shortness of breath? Or there low back pain, bloating? Like, just noticing, even if you think it's unrelated to trauma, like, how is my body speaking to me? The way that we tend to, especially in like Western culture, view our physical symptoms is we see them kind of like these pesky house rats. Like, you're annoying me. You're like an inconvenience. Like, let's shoo you out. As opposed to there's a lot of other places around the world that are more in touch with their body. They are more like somatic based in their cultures, just in general, where they see symptoms as like, oh, this is the way my body's trying to communicate with me. Like, let me not just try to shoo it away with an Advil or, a Pepto Bismol or just get rid of this. But let me just make a small shift and ask, what could this potentially be telling me about maybe a deeper emotional wound or something dysregulated, emotionally, that I can tend to that. Sometimes it is just purely physical things, right? Like the different symptoms that we're having, or if we're dealing with a disorder, a diagnosis, sometimes it is just purely physical. But a lot of the times, especially just in the world that I'm in, the clients that I work with, there is a root of like just an unhealed wound or trauma that it can point them to. And so it's not bad to have these symptoms, and it's not bad to have even like triggered responses. When we think about like how we all get triggered into, you might have heard the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn modes. So fight, flight, freeze are kind of self-explanatory, more familiar. The fawn one tends to be like, wait, what's that one? And it's more just people pleasing. Like if we feel like we're triggered or stressed out or overwhelmed outside of our typical ability to cope, we seek comfort and affirmation from people, or like, making sure that the people around us are good with us. So that's fun. So all of those are natural responses of your nervous system basically telling you like, hey, danger, danger, I'm trying to keep you safe. And thank God we have those responses, because otherwise we'd walk out into traffic and get hit by a car because we have like no danger signal. But the problem becomes when we get caught in those responses and we don't know how to come back to homeostasis, to come back to a regulated nervous system, to move that trauma out of our body, as opposed to it staying or locking into our actual like muscle fascia and cells, subconscious, for it to become frozen. Um, so that's an indicator, I would say, just to answer that question, like, how do we know we're caught in trauma? And like, what does an overwhelmed nervous system look like? It's one that's either caught in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and you don't even know what it feels like to be safe, or you don't know how to get back there, even if you do know or remember like what it once felt like at
Mhm.
one time to be in a regulated nervous system.
Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing you say is that you could be experiencing actual physical symptoms like pain
Mm-hmm.
in your body, but also these emotional symptoms of the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece might be harder for people to identify because once behaviors become patterned, sometimes we can't even see our own pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when you were struggling with your husband and you didn't realize what was going on, you thought what, that it was just the marriage? Is that what you thought at the time, that it was just you and him were in this unhealthy dance together, but you weren't able to recognize at that time that it was because of this trauma that you had experienced and how it was impacting your behavior? Is that an
100%.
accurate
Yeah,
assessment?
for
Okay.
exactly. For like a decade, I was like, we just got to fix the marriage, got to fix the marriage. It wasn't until stumbling upon somatic work that I'm like, oh, my body has kept the score of all the trauma I've been through. And like, these are actually the blocks that I need to focus on and move out in order for me and him to reconnect.
Okay. And I can say that, and we'll get into, I want to actually also give a really good definition of what somatic work is as well. But I, I've been through many things in my life, including a chronic pain condition. And as we mentioned before we started recording, my daughter's serious mental
Mm-hmm.
health conditions, postpartum depression. I could go on. It's been a lot of things that have led me down the path that I'm currently on. And so, I can look back now and see where all of that struggle was leading me. But of course, in the moment, it was impossible for me to see. But I have always been drawn to movement. And I think this is common for a lot of people, right? So I actually have a friend who's going through a really rough time right now. And I said, what are you going to do to help yourself? And she said, I'm going to just run a lot. right? So I think this is common. People move, they know that when they're emotionally struggling, sometimes moving their body is one of the ways that can help them to feel better. For me, it was a deep dive into yoga and breath work and meditation. So we kind of instinctually know this, right? That we feel something in our body that we don't like. And we might identify that as like anxiety or stress or fear or whatever. And then we kind of instinctively know we need to like shake it out or move it
Mhm.
around our body. But I think we can get clearer on it. I think I would love for my audience to get a clearer idea of what's actually happening when they do that and how they can better do it for themselves in their own lives.
Yeah, great question. So, first to define somatic work, somatic really just means pertaining to the body as opposed to just the mind. And so, a lot of, typical modalities out there right now, like if you are experiencing mental health issues or problems in your relationship, if you're seeking healing, a lot of the suggestions are like go to therapy, right? Like go find a therapist, which that's great, but traditional, if you're not like a somatic trained therapist, traditionally it's just talk therapy. So it's really tapping into the neck up. So talking or like listen to this podcast, girl, listening or read this, on Instagram or, that's more cerebral. So all these modalities from the neck up, where somatic work really gets into the body and learning how to like calm your senses, ground back into your body instead of getting lost in rumination or worry, how to move trauma out. And so yoga is definitely a part of that. Breath work is definitely a part of that. Shaking, you mentioned, is a part of that. The shaking one's interesting because it's like animals do that, like
Mhm.
in the wild, which is so
Yeah.
cool. Like if
Yeah.
they're
Even our dogs do it, right? When you
my
see your
cat
dog
does
shake it
it.
out. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. They literally shake it out if they are in threat of danger. And then once the danger's passed, you'll see them shake. But that's weird for us. So it's like we may feel that natural impulse to do that, but in the middle of Target and we get a text message that's triggering. If we like start shaking, we're gonna get really weird looks. We're gonna get maybe security called on us. And so
Right.
there's that extra piece that makes it hard for us to naturally move trauma out in ways that we instinctually would because of the society we live in and we're too sophisticated for that, or
Right.
unless you're at a Taylor Swift concert and then you can shake it out, that's fine.
Right.
um but yeah, so somatic work is just that. The last thing I'll say, just to like illustrate this real well for people, this helped me, this helps a lot of others, is we've all got the vagus nerve. It's like the big kahuna giant nerve. It's the second biggest nerve in our body next to the spinal cord. And it runs from the base of our neck to the bottom of our spine. And it's like the super highway of information for our bodies, where neurotransmitters are constantly running up and down it from our brain to our body, body to our brain. Now, only 20% of those messengers, those neurotransmitters, go from our brain to our body, and 80% go from our body to our brain. So, all that to say, the like neck up modalities are awesome, but if that's all you're tapping into, you're only working with the 20% of how your body's designed to communicate with
Yeah.
itself. But when you do what you're into, the yoga, the breath work, the, movement, the shaking, the learning how to understand how to work with your body, you're like now leveraging the 80%. And so what I found was so many people who've only tapped into neck up stuff for years, the somatic piece ends up being this missing puzzle piece, kind of the key to unlock a lot of latent information, self-awareness, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I have heard that statistic before that is mind blowing to me the first time I heard it. It's still mind blowing, even though I know it, that
Yeah.
80% runs up and only 20% runs down. And what they teach, a lot in like these ancient wisdom traditions like yoga is that the body is really intelligent, and we only think of the brain as being intelligent, but the body is so intelligent. And we in our culture, I think, are kind of taught to ignore it, right? We kind of ignore the body unless there's like a real problem with it. And then we go to the doctor to try to, like you said, take care of the problem because it's an annoyance in our lives that we're trying to like, check the boxes and get everything done. And we just want this problem to go away. But the body is always trying to communicate with us if we're willing to listen. And the other thing that I've learned, which I was like, wow, this just makes so much sense, is that, our brain has been evolving for a very long time. I don't know the exact numbers, but we all know the human brain has been evolving for a very long time. And the part of our brain, that reasoning part, that frontal cortex that reasons and makes decisions and weighs consequences, is the youngest part of our brain. It is the least evolved part of our brain because it is the newest portion in the human evolution of our brain. And so those deeper portions of our brain that do a lot of communicating to our body about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, all those pieces have evolved for much longer. And so they can communicate really effectively to the body, but the body doesn't know the difference between a real threat, like a saber-toothed tiger is going to kill me, and the threat of, I got this really bad text and my heart is now pounding and I feel like I can't breathe, right? Your body can't like discern the difference. It's all the same to your body.
Yeah.
And so we have to recognize that and then be able to, yes, to use our bodies to regulate our nervous system. So this is all great.
Yeah.
So when clients come to you, well, okay, let me back it up I have another question. So, one of our the Mom on the Verge podcast was, I had an authenticity coach on, and that episode really resonated with so many of my my listeners. They just love that episode, and I love that episode. Her name was Karen Canting Brooding. She's amazing. And she was really encouraging women to step into their true authenticity. But what happens when you do that is that if you are married, and this brings in the marriage piece, because I know that's also part of what you do. If you do that, your relationship starts to change with your partner. And can be challenging. Because, we all know in a marriage, there's a certain dynamic. And so if one person really starts changing, then that changes the dynamic of the relationship. And so I recently had a friend ask me, like, how are we supposed to navigate that? What if stepping into our authenticity then threatens our marriage, which is still really important to me? How do we navigate that? So do you have any advice?
Such a good question. And now I'm going to listen to your authenticity episode because it's my highest core value is that word. So it's just so relatable. And we all, especially if we find ourselves in like a toxic dance in our marriage, and then someone decides to take the lead and start stepping differently, it's going to feel scary, not only for the person like taking the lead on that, but it's also going to be like, what the hell's happening to the person, that you're in partnership with? Because like you said, our nervous system doesn't know the difference between what's healthy for us or unhealthy, what's like a real threat or a perceived threat. It only knows its comfort zone and its familiarity, even if that comfort zone is super toxic. So it's like that quote, a nervous system will decide every time to stay in a familiar hell than go into an unfamiliar heaven. So it does take like calming the nervous system down enough to hear your own intuition in those moments of like, no, this is really what I need to do next, to step into this most aligned me. And that's the really terrifying part where a lot of my clients, if not all of them, begin the journey. When I first meet them, they've lived this toxic pattern for years. They're on the fence of should I stay or should I go? If I start stepping differently, like this could threaten the relationship. I don't know if he's going to want to like take that step with me. And that's the risk. That's the trust fall. That's the part where it's like, so many people, it comes down to just my intuition of like, okay, even if they're at that place, like even if he decides not to step with me, I still need to do this for myself because I'm not well and I'm so out of alignment, and life is short, and like I need to step into that for myself. And so what I've seen time and time again, this was my, experience too, is when I first started changing, it did rattle, and things felt like they were falling apart before they fell back together. And that's really like ended up becoming our blessing because we did need to build a completely new marriage. For a while, I was just trying to go back to how it once was and back to the honeymoon phase. And I do remember my coach even saying, she kind of painted this picture one day of, no, you think of it like a house. Like you want to burn down the old house. The old house did not work. You want to throw out the countertops, throw out the couches. Like you need to build something completely new because what the structure has not been working. So all that to say, I've seen both outcomes. I've seen women stepping into their authenticity and those who do never ever regretting it. Whether their husband decides to join with them, that becomes the cherry on top, or if it more just kind of highlights he's not ready, he's really not on the same page. They're now in a place where that doesn't threaten their survival, their love and belonging the way that it once does. They've gotten to this point of like, I'm so at peace with this decision. I'm anchored, I'm grounded, and I know that this is, what I'm meant to be in.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. That's really good. Especially that first part about that we always return to what we know, so
Yeah.
that stepping into anything that is unfamiliar, whether it's good or not, feels super scary and threatening, and it makes us want to pull back. It makes us
Mhm.
feel like, oh, this is uncomfortable, this is I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe, even though this other situation I may be in is not safe either, or not the best for me or my life or my family or my children or whatever it may be, but it is familiar. And we really do, as humans, I think, tend to be more comfortable in the familiar.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you highlighted that, so that people, when they are thinking about making these changes, know to try to access their intuition as to, am I experiencing these sensations, thoughts, and feelings because this really isn't the right decision for me, or because it's just a different decision for me. And it's hard. It's hard if you haven't been practicing accessing your intuition. I know for a long time I wasn't accessing it. And I remember even saying out loud to a yoga teacher that I was close with at the time, like, I can't hear it anymore. I used to be able to hear it, and it's like it's gone. It's like it's just gone. It's just so quiet. And it was because I was living so far out of my authenticity that it I think I had ignored it so many times, and it just was piled over with
Mhm.
inauthenticity that I just couldn't access it anymore. And it took a lot of somatic work, which I didn't realize that's what I was doing at the
Yeah.
time. But it was to find it again. And to hear it again. So it is possible, even if you feel like you've lost it, it is possible to find it again. It's always there. I think it just sometimes gets really quiet and hard to hear.
Yeah, I had just never been taught to trust it in the first place. So, like, I've heard that from women where it's like, I used to be in touch with it, and then stuff has happened, piled on, and now I can't hear it. And I feel like with me, I was like, I never even knew to begin with. So it felt like waking up this whole new thing that was always in me, but like learning to flex a new muscle. And there was different things that I would say led to a corroded relationship with my own intuition, like just even myself going through betrayal trauma. There's a lot of like deceit that comes with that. And so a lot of moments where I'm like, hey, is something off? And then being told by your partner, like, no, everything's fine. Later to find out it was not fine. It's like, oh, my intuition was right. Okay. But I learned to like stuff that down and just call myself crazy. Or also just different spiritual communities I was in were they harped hard on getting advice from people and trusting authority and like not trusting yourself. And so I feel like, yeah, it can be different things that lead to this corroded sense of intuition. And that's a whole nother conversation, I think, for a whole nother time to dive into. But yeah, just wanted to relate to that one.
Yes. So if people are interested in trying to work with their bodies, where would they start? Where would they begin? If they're just like, you know what, I think
Yeah.
there's something going on here. I don't know what it is, but I want to try to investigate. Like, what's a
Yeah.
recommendation you give people?
Where I started just personally because I like Instagram was I started following accounts. Like there's such
Okay.
amazing free information. If you just type in like somatic, practitioners or accounts, and following those, getting nuggets from there. You could literally Google grounding techniques. I mean, that's where I start with my clients is just teaching them kind of at the baseline. One of the foundational steps is how do I feel safe again in my own body, in my own nervous system. So there's like a myriad of grounding techniques out there. I kind of lay out the buffet for my clients. I say, take your pick, practice like what feels good with you and leave the rest. But just one example of a grounding technique would be the five senses. So, like, if you're triggered, if you're in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode in the middle of Target, get a text, right? Like, you can just stop or keep walking and name five things you see, four things you can hear, three things you can physically touch or feel, two things you can taste, and one thing you can smell. And what that does is it takes you out of that activated survival, known as the sympathetic nervous system, back into the safe, I can rest, I can just digest, known as the parasympathetic nervous system. It gets you out of your head, back into your body, grounded. So there's a million. Some people are into like cold plunges. I've done it, but I'm like not a fan. I'm like never like, I was trying to do a cold plunge. Um, Different breathing techniques. But yeah, grounding tools is where I would start.
Okay, that's great recommendation. Someone told me to walk barefoot outside, like
Yes.
in the grass. Yes. And I was like, come on, I'm always the skeptic. I'm always the skeptic. And then I was like, actually, this is super calming. It really was super calming. And, it's what our kids do instinctually, right? They all want to like have their shoes off and run around outside with their shoes off. And I think that we just like we forget these things that we instinctually did when we were kids, and somehow the world told us like not to do them, and so we did it, and we lost that connection. I think also that this type of work, and I can say this from personal experience, helps when you don't even realize there's something there. So for example, I'm a nurse, and I'm a labor and delivery nurse, and so a lot of people think like, oh, like that's amazing, it must be so happy. And yes, there are moments where it's good and it's happy, but there's a lot of trauma there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I work in an inner city hospital with a challenged population, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot, and we as nurses are asked to go through something really traumatic, and then what we need to do as a profession, just to be professional, is go into the next patient room and act like that thing didn't just happen, right?
Wow.
For the rest of your day, you're interacting with people who are there to have a good experience and are trying to have this beautiful birth experience. But you have just walked out of a room where a baby has died, or
Mm-hmm.
a mom has lost her uterus, and we have to tell her that she cannot have any more children. Or there are so many, or a woman comes in because her partner beat her so badly that she is now hospitalized. There are so many traumatic events that we have to stuff down for the sake of our patients in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we leave, we have to figure out how to process that, right? How do we now take all this trauma that we just experienced, and sometimes there's a piece that, could we have done something else, right? Could we have done this differently, or could we have done that differently? And so then there's a guilt piece that comes with it. Could we have avoided an outcome had we made a different decision at a different time? And so as healthcare workers, we experience a lot of trauma on a daily basis that we're
Yep.
asked to power through and just keep showing up day after day and receiving these traumas and shoving them down and going into the next patient's room. And I don't think we're alone. I think that's the healthcare
Yep.
world, but I think there are a lot of spaces where people are asked to absorb trauma and then act like it hasn't happened and move on with their life and their day. And sometimes I think we don't even recognize that it's in there, right? We did shove it down, and we shoved it down so far that we don't even know that it's still there. And what I have found through this somatic work is that again, the body is so intelligent, the body keeps the score, that it comes out. All of a sudden, this stuff surfaces, right? I'm in the middle of a yoga class and I just start crying. Or I am in the middle of a breathwork session and the same thing happens, like tears are welling up in my eyes. And it takes a moment to even be like, what is this about? Why am I experiencing this release at this time? So that's why I want to be able to help people. I just think that like even in that authenticity call, we talked about how do you know if you're being inauthentic? Because sometimes when we're moving through these patterns in our lives, they're so ingrained in us that it's almost hard to tell that we're not being authentic, or that we've experienced a trauma that's informing our lives that we just don't see it, you know? So maybe would grounding be a good way for people to start recognizing if maybe something's impacting them?
I mean, first of all, I just want to thank you for sharing that. And like, first thoughts, honestly, is just how much of a systemic problem it is. Like, it's just the way our society is. The fact that, environments that are set up where you don't even have a break, to be able to process what trauma your body just endured, trying to help and serve these patients that you're with. And so, I just want to acknowledge that as like, this is not set up for, like, our society is not set up for us to be good at this. There's not like a lot of conversation about how to do it. That conversation is rising and growing. I'm excited about that. But it's not like you're getting training, I'm assuming, as a nurse, of like, make sure in between every patient you have like a 30-minute debrief where you can move your body and get trauma out. So sure, grounding techniques, yes, can help in those moments, but also just wanted to like couple that with the acknowledgement of how insanely like hard that is. And it made me curious to ask you, like, just even professional lines that that you can and can't cross. Are you allowed to, let's say a mom does lose a baby, can you talk to her and like acknowledge her grief or say anything personal, or are you supposed to like keep it together?
So there's a whole process that if a mom loses her baby that we go through with her. So obviously, depending on the circumstances, but a lot of times she has to deliver the baby with us. So the baby, she may come in and the baby is already deceased, or the baby may die in the process of delivery. And then there's a whole, we go through the delivery with her. There's a bereavement. It's what's called a bereavement process, where we do photographs and footprints and keepsakes, and we discuss what grieving may look like for her and what support systems are out there, and her choice as far as, does she want what she wants to do with the remains of her baby. And there's a whole process in place, but that process is to support and serve her and her partner and her family. And so, our role as nursing is to be her support. And so, I try not to break down in front of my patients because I'm not sure that that's very helpful to them. I try to be a calming, soothing, supportive energy that they feel that they can lean on in that time. But then that leaves me with finding out how to support myself
Yeah.
afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause it's like secondhand grief for you. You're just being all in and there for her, but it's like
Oh, Becky, you're frozen.
you've slept. Hey, I wasn't sure.
Hi. Yeah, you froze. You froze. I'm like, I bet she'll log off and come back on.
So what was the last thing? Do you remember?
So I heard you say it's like secondhand grief.
Okay. So yeah, it's like secondhand grief because in those moments, like you're just there for her and you're trying to be all in for her grief, but really you're holding back tears. There's like a grief of your own that you're needing to go through. You can in that moment. So I imagine it's like hard, nearly impossible to take breaks during your shift. You're so go, 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 I imagine.
Yes,
And then I
yes.
also imagine you're exhausted by the end. So it may not even be like you have the energy to process that at the end of your shift, but like maybe it's after sleeping and the next day, but finding the spaces in your schedule when you have them to even complete that grief. That's a whole nother topic for another time too. But by that I mean like maybe even saying to yourself or to that woman what you wish you could have said in that moment, or allowing your body to do or like release what you wish you could have done or released in that moment. So if it was like you wanted to cry, you don't have to force tears, but like just going back to that place and honoring like what, even with your hand over your heart, I do this a lot, or like a self hug, honoring like what you were feeling in that moment, what your body was experiencing, and telling yourself, like, might feel crazy talking to yourself if you've never done that before, or even like speaking to her or writing something to her of like what you wish you could have said, can help you just process that and let it release instead of it getting stuck in your body.
Yeah, and I think that's a great those things that you mentioned are would be so useful for many people in many situations. And I actually a lot of my listeners are mothers, and I think that we experience a lot of trauma as mothers because if
Yeah.
we see our children suffering, that is trauma
Mhm.
for us, right? No mom wants to see their child suffering. And particularly now there is really an epidemic of anxiety and depression and suicide in children and teens. And I myself, as I mentioned, my daughter went through several years of really traumatic mental health struggles where we were afraid for her on a regular basis for a long time. And there was a lot of doctors and interventions and many things that we were doing for her to try to get her well. And that was very traumatic for me as her mother. But at the same instance, like being a nurse, I was not going to be openly discussing how traumatic that was on
Right.
me in front of her because that is not what she needed. That is not
Yeah.
what she needed. So I had to find ways of processing that trauma outside of that situation. And I think that's what I experienced is not uncommon, whether it is the trauma of something you're going through with your child or your partner or a loved one in your family who may be sick. We experience these types of really, really challenging situations all the time where we're asked to be strong and be what the other person needs us to be in that moment. But then we can't forget to take care of ourselves after that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or we can't be there. That's what I remember thinking when I was going through the things with my daughter, and people would say to me, I don't know how you're still showing up to work. I don't know how you're still functioning. And I was telling them all the things that I was doing. And I was saying, like, I I am steering the ship. And if I fall
Mhm.
apart, the ship falls apart. Like
Mhm.
I need to take care of myself
Mhm.
or all of this is going to collapse. And as women and as mothers, that's so true, right? We're so often the people who are steering the ship and our
Yeah.
families are depending on us. And so this work, being able to do this work that allows us to feel safe in our bodies and come into our authenticity and access our intuition, because I think somatic work does all of those things, is just so, so important. I think you're frozen again.
Last thing I heard you say was it's like up to us.
Oh no. Oh, there you're back.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
I don't know why my internet, it just said my internet's unstable. I don't know why. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Last thing you heard me say is what? I'm sorry.
So it's up to us to learn how to calm our own bodies, like as mothers steering the ship.
Yeah, I was just saying how like the work that you're doing, this somatic work, I think it helps us do all of the things that we were talking about that are so important. I think it helps us access our authenticity. I think it helps us hear our intuition. It helps us calm our nervous system. And again, like going back to my experience with my daughter, I remember thinking, there were so many options and so many
Mhm.
impossible decisions that needed to be made. And had I not been deep into that work prior to that experience, I don't know how I would have made all those decisions, because it was really being able to get into my body and access my intuition and feel calm despite everything that was going on around me, that I could make good decisions that I felt intuitively were the right decisions. And so anyway, I just think of all the things we've been talking about, all these really important things. Somatic work is the basis for so much of it and can help with so much of it. And so I would love to see this work spread like wildfire out into our world.
Me too. Let's claim that. Let's bring that
Yeah.
into our world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as parents too. So again, a lot of listeners are parents out there. How can we help our kids do this?
Do you have another hour? Okay, no, I'll answer in like one thing. So what I'll say, because even what you said of like we're the moms, we steer the ship, like we need to take care of ourselves and learn how to calm our own body, but also remember like, hey, like we're leading these little precious souls. And I think just what I would add to that and kind of confirm what you're saying is just we can do both of those, and it can feel really tricky and impossible. I just before you and I started recording was having a conversation with a mom that is going through divorce, and she's crying in front of her kids and she feels so guilty that they're seeing her cry. And I just reminded her, like, mama, you're reversing generational trauma by letting your baby see you cry. It is not bad to let your baby see you cry. You don't need to ask them to be your therapist. You can let them know, hey, I'm getting support, I don't need you to fix me. But letting them see your tears, one, can normalize for them when they get sad and when they cry. Oh, like, I'm not messed up, this is normal. Mommy cries and mommy's my superhero, mommy's awesome, so I can cry too. And so that's something like our parents' generation just did not. It was more pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you're a crybaby. And so as much as I can, it's like communicating to my kids if I'm having a hard day with my own anxiety or my own nervous system, like, hey, mommy's doing my best, but I'm not going to like jump in the pool with you today. I'm just going to sit here, just relax a little bit. Like, you guys have fun, as opposed to what I did for so long was like this martyr mom thing of like just trying to be everything and do exactly what they want. And it was only stressing my nervous system out more. So just learning to communicate more even boundaries with my kiddos as I steer this ship of like where my nervous system's at on any given day. And the cool thing is with somatic work, if you even Google grounding tools, it's all stuff your kids can freaking practice. That's the cool
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
Like you said this earlier, but I feel like somatic work can be summed up in just how to come back home to you and your essence, your like childhood essence.
Mhm.
That we've all lost or buried over time. And so I teach my kids the five senses. Last night, my husband bought one of those like Tibetan sound bowls, where you like
Yeah.
go like it's like ooh.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we started doing it with the kids, just turn the lights off before bed, and it was cool. They were like into it. But sound therapy, even like that's a whole thing. It helps like rearrange molecules in your body and regulate. So that would be my encouragement, is just dip your toe into how to calm your own body, and then maybe even practice with the kiddos. They're going to think it's cool and maybe weird, but like they're kids, they're game for anything, and little do they know is you're regulating their little nervous system.
Yes. I know. My kids see me do all the things that I do, and they well, my daughter is going to be 15 in a couple of weeks. So she's full on teenager. And, my son is about to be 10 and they just kind of make fun of me, honestly. But it's fine because they see me doing it and they know it's so helpful to me. And I feel like, I try to encourage them to do it, but so far, no bites, but I am still hopeful that as their lives progress, that they have the knowledge and the memory of me doing
Yes.
these things, and that at some point they may turn to them because
Yeah.
they know it's there. They know it's accessible to them if they feel that they need it.
Even if they don't bite, you're mirroring it to them. That's being like imprinted on their nervous system blueprint. So like
Yeah.
they won't forget it. It's there in their pocket if they decide to reach for it for later.
So true, so true. And my husband has a little bit more of a short temper, and my son once said to me, why does Papa, get so mad? You're always so calm." And I said, "Yoga and meditation." That's why. Yeah. And then he actually thanked me. He said, "Well, thank you for doing that. Thank you for, for
Oh,
doing that and always being so calm." And, they're kids, they're little, especially the little ones, they don't want you to go. Mom is going to yoga, like, "Oh, don't go, please stay
yeah,
home." We've all experienced this as a mom. Um, but it's so important to take that time to go because you really, people say it all the time, but it's just so true. You will be a better mom, and eventually your kids will recognize it. And now when I have actually a little sign that I post on my door when I'm meditating that says like meditation in progress,
that's
and the
funny.
kids know not to come in and interrupt me.
Ah,
And but they're like all for it now. They're like, "Oh, that keeps her calm. Okay, great. You go do that now."
I love it.
Well, it was so nice having you on. And I feel like we could have like 6 other conversations about other topics. So maybe we'll do it again sometime.
I would love to, Katie. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You have a great day.
You too.
All
Bye.
right. Bye. Okay, I hope you really enjoyed that. I could have talked to Becky for hours, so you might see her resurface again on another one of our episodes. I promised at the beginning of the show that I would give you some grounding techniques. Becky mentioned one of my favorites, which is the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. You can do this anywhere, anytime. It doesn't take a lot of time to do, but basically, you walk through your senses using this 5-4-3-2-1. So you may start with your sight. So wherever you are, wherever you happen to be, if you're feeling anxious or uh, like you just need to calm your body, you will look at 5 things in the space around you. So you'll just look at them. For example, if I were doing it right now, I see my microphone, I see my computer, I see a candle burning on my desk. I see trees outside my window, and I see my cup of water that's sitting next to me. So you can choose any 5 things to look at. And then you go to 4. And what are 4 things that I can hear? So I can hear myself speaking. I can hear the neighbors doing their lawn. I can hear my dog softly breathing in and out next to me. I can hear my seat creak a little bit as I adjust in it. And I think that was 4. Then you can go to 3. What are 3 things that you can feel? So right now I can feel a little bit of a breeze that's coming in. I have a window open, so I can feel a little bit of a breeze that's coming in. I can feel that my left leg is a little uncomfortable because I've had it crossed over my right leg for a bit, and I think I'm going to have to move soon because it feels a little tingly and uncomfortable. And I can feel that my right foot is solidly planted on the floor. And then we move to 2. What are 2 things that I can smell? Well, let's see. I smell some sweet potato that I baked for my dog this morning that's still wafting in the air from my kitchen. And I can smell the fresh air from the outside that I mentioned I had the window open. And lastly, what is one thing that I can taste? I can still taste a little bit of my breakfast that I had this morning. So that's the 5-4-3-2-1. You can do it in whatever sense order that you like. That's the order that I like to do it in, but you can play around with it and do it in your way. It really brings you back to the present moment. A lot of grounding techniques, that is how they work, is by bringing you back firmly into the ground, into the present moment. I'll give you a few others that I like as well. And then, of course, my newsletter will give you much more detail on all these topics. But walking barefoot is another great one. We mentioned this in the episode. I was very skeptical of this at first. I don't know. I'm very skeptical of everything at first. I'm always that person who has to try it to believe it. So one time, my daughter was back at the hospital, hospitalized for yet another horrible migraine, that I had to pick her up from school and take her to the hospital. And this has not been an uncommon thing for her in the past couple of years. But I was just feeling really, really out of my body. And so I took a few moments. She was resting. She had received some IV medication and was resting. And so I took a few moments to step outside, and I thought, what the heck? What do I have to lose? And I took my shoes off and I started walking in the grass outside of the hospital emergency room. I'm sure I looked like a complete loon, but I'll tell you what, it worked. It was so helpful. It really did calm me down and make me feel so much more present and peaceful and connected and able to continue on with caring for my daughter. Here's another one I tried recently, which again, I know you're all going to be chuckling at me, and it's fine. I'm really okay with it. Um, Recently, a friend of mine lost her husband to cancer, and it has been just so incredibly sad, as you can imagine. And as her friend, all I want to do is help her. And there's very little that I can actually do. I'm doing everything that I can, but it feels really inadequate for the size of her loss. And I was again feeling just very emotional and overwhelmed. And I went to take my dog on one of our usual hikes. And although it was wonderful to be out there and it was helping me, just still couldn't shake these feelings. I still couldn't calm my nervous system down enough. And I decided to actually hug a tree. And I'm laughing at myself as I'm saying it because I'm sure I would have looked ridiculous had anyone seen me. But I thought, I love trees and I love the energy of trees, and they're so sacred to me. And I just decided to do it. I'd never actually hugged a tree before. So I did it. And I'll tell you what, it was amazing. It really, the tree holds just such a calming, grounded, steady, peaceful energy. And it transmitted it to me. So laugh if you will, but I'm telling you, try it. Don't knock it till you try it. And then, of course, breath work has been a huge one for me. So I'll give you a short breath work technique that you can use that is really helpful when you're in grief or just very highly emotional situations. It's called again, a funny name. It's called the sniff, sniff, poo. So what you do is you sniff in, and then you sniff in again, and then you blow out through your mouth with a P sound. So okay. And you take that first sniff is about 75% of your lung volume. And then that second sniff is just topping it off. You're taking the rest of your lung volume in, and then you're pooing it out. And you can do that for as long as it feels comfortable for you. But it is very calming and it can be done anywhere. So those are some of my grounding techniques. Sound therapy is another one, and I'm going to see if I can give you some ideas of where you can turn to for sound therapy in my newsletter. So if you want to try to use sound therapy as a technique for yourself and for calming your nervous system, then check out my newsletter this week. All right, guys, I love you so much. As always, I hope you found this useful. I hope there was something in this episode that you really identified with and something that you could take out of it to make your life better. and I will be back with you next week. Love you. Bye. Hi, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, I ask that you please like the show, follow, subscribe, or share. The way that podcasts work is the more people that do one of those things, the more likely it is that when someone's looking for a podcast to listen to, our show will pop up for them. I started this podcast because I really see there's a great need in our world for people to feel more peace, joy, love, and acceptance in their lives. And I think we can do that when we have a greater sense of self-awareness. We could become conscious creators of our own lives. And I'm seeking to do that for as many people as possible. So if you could help me by liking, sharing, or subscribing to the show, I'd really appreciate it. And hopefully someone hears a conversation that changes their life. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time. Much love.